Join us as we journey deeper into the nightmarish world of medieval traps and punishments, where justice and brutality often walk hand in hand. During the Middle Ages, torture was considered a legitimate way to extract confessions, punish offenders, and perform executions. Some methods were considerably crueler. Laws and local customs did not limit prisoners' treatment or the extent to which torture could be inflicted. Let's have a look at some of the torture devices used during the era. Pair of anguish. This heinous contraption was used during the Middle Ages as a way to torture women who were accused of facilitating a miscarriage. It was also used to punish liars, blasphemers, and homosexuals. The device was inserted into one of the prisoner's orifices, the vagina for women, the anus for homosexuals, and the mouth for liars and blasphemers, which is why it's also known as the choke pear. The device featured 4 metal leaves that slowly separated from each other as the torturer turned the screw at the top. The torturer could use it to tear the skin or expand it to its maximum size to mutilate the victim. It rarely caused death, but it was often followed by other torture methods. Iron Maiden. This torture device was used extensively during the Middle Ages. Victims would be placed into the chair, which featured hundreds of sharp spikes, followed by the progressive tightening of iron restraints, forcing the spikes deep into the flesh. This could go on for hours, sometimes days. The spikes did not penetrate vital organs and blood loss was minimized, at least until the person was released from the chair. Death often followed. The iron chair was often used as a psychological instrument of torture. Victims would often confess after being forced to watch other prisoners being tortured by the device. Rack. The rack of torture device was a rectangular wooden or iron frame that was usually raised from the ground with a roller at one or both ends. The victim's wrists and ankles were chained to the rollers, and as the interrogation progressed, a handle and cord mechanism attached to the top roller was used to gradually retract the chains. It gradually increased the strain on the prisoner's shoulders, hips, knees, and elbows while causing excruciating pain. Using pulleys and levers, the roller could be rotated on its axis, thus straining the ropes until the victim's joints were dislocated and eventually separated from the body. Additionally, when muscle fibers were stretched excessively, they lost their ability to contract, rendering them ineffective. The torture device has been used in situations of standard charges like blasphemy and heresy. Eventually, witchcraft and other crimes against religion and morality were also included. Let's name some other torture methods, but my dear friends, let's keep the horror of explaining them away. 1. Breaking wheel. 2. Saw torture. 3. Rat torture. 4. Head crusher. 5. Breast ripper, etc., etc., etc. It is very hard to visualize these devices being used on humans, yet there were large crowds that were used to watching the action. Some were supporters and used to wish for their hero's quick death, and some were just being insensitive spectators. Let's see a few famous examples and usage of these horrific torture devices. One of them was the tragic fate of William Wallace. William Wallace, a Scottish knight, became a central early figure in the wars to secure Scottish freedom from the English, becoming one of his country's greatest national heroes. Despite his courageous resistance against the English, Wallace was found guilty of high treason and sentenced to a gruesome execution. As the day of execution arrived, the medieval public gathered to witness the grim fate of their hero. The air was thick with sorrow and anger. The emotional impact of Wallace's execution was profound. He was not just a symbol of resistance, he represented the enduring spirit of the Scottish people. He was to be hung, strung, and quartered. Friends, perhaps the most brutal of all execution methods is hung, strung, and quartered. This was traditionally given to anyone found guilty of high treason. The culprit would be hung and just seconds before death, released, then disemboweled, and their organs were then thrown into a fire, all while still alive. Once dead, they would be cut into 4 pieces and traditionally have their body parts sent to 4 different parts of a city as a public warning to others. Then, there was an impaling and the legend of Vlad the Impaler. Vlad the Impaler, whose real name was Vlad III or Vlad Dracula, earned a fearsome reputation for his cruelty. He was the ruler of Wallachia, a region in modern-day Romania. He ruled with an iron fist and used impalement as a brutal form of punishment and psychological warfare. Impaling was a method in which victims were impaled alive on sharp wooden stakes, a gruesome spectacle designed to prolong suffering. The most shocking public form of executions was often given to suspected witches, women found guilty of infanticide, and child molesters. Historically, the Iron Maiden was believed to have been used during the late Middle Ages, coinciding with the era of Vlad the Impaler. This chilling device was intended to inflict prolonged agony, making it a favorite among those who sought to extract confessions or make gruesome examples of their victims. Now, Let us see some effects of these horrific and brutal punishments and convictions brought to the people. The punishments we've explored not only inflicted physical agony, but also left indelible scars on the minds and souls of those subjected to them. The psychological torment was profound. Victims knew that their suffering was deliberately prolonged, a cruel spectacle meant to break their spirit and induce terror. For those dunked as witches, the fear of water, the sensation of drowning, and the public humiliation weighed heavily on their psyche. Inside the brazen bull, the psychological horror was exacerbated by the victims' awareness of their impending doom. The knowledge that they were slowly roasting alive, surrounded by the agonized cries escaping the bull's openings, would have been utterly nightmarish. These punishments were not just about causing pain, they aimed to crush the human spirit, to reduce victims to broken souls. My dear friends, at this point, a question comes into our minds. Why was the medieval era so harsh about punishment? In general, the harsh penalties were due to a lack of two things: tolerance and prisons. Laws were made by the king for the common good, so messing with his money and punishment was inevitable and fierce. Lopping off body parts or branding also permanently marked a person as a criminal, as well as making them hideous and undesirable. Prisons did not exist as places for punishment. Jails were temporary holding places for persons accused of crimes until they stood trial. The model of law enforcement was intended to scare people into obedience and impair them if they broke the law and were caught. Another reason can be that rehabilitation is a relatively recent concept, and the threat of corporal punishment simply works. The transformation of the punishment system. As we leave behind the horrors of the Middle Ages, we enter a new era marked by intellectual awakening and the gradual transformation of justice. During this time, philosophers, thinkers, and reformers questioned the cruelty of medieval punishments and advocated for more humane treatment of individuals. The Enlightenment, in particular, played a pivotal role in shaping modern justice systems. It championed the principles of reason, fairness, and the rights of the individual. This era paved the way for the emergence of modern legal codes, constitutional protections, and the abolition of cruel and unusual punishments. Today, our justice systems are built upon principles that prioritize due process, the presumption of innocence, and the rehabilitation of offenders. The horrors of the past have not been forgotten. They serve as a reminder of the progress we've made in our pursuit of justice. International agreements and organizations, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Criminal Court, stand as beacons of hope and accountability. While our world is far from perfect, the transition from medieval cruelty to modern justice systems represents a fundamental shift towards a more just, equitable, and compassionate society.